The sky over Arendor was a perpetual canvas of muted grays and browns, a reflection of the barren land beneath it. On this harsh, unforgiving planet, survival was not a right, but a privilege reserved for the strong or the fortunate. The air was thick with dust and desolation clinging to everything it touched. The winds carried not just the chill of the desert night, but the weight of countless lost hopes, dreams crushed under the relentless burden of poverty and despair. In a small, dilapidated dwelling on the outskirts of a crumbling settlement, Zinnia's father, Archon, sat by the dim glow of a fading lamp. His face, etched with deep lines of worry and fatigue, was a testament to the years of hardship that had weighed heavily on him. Every day was a battle to scrape together enough food for his family, and every night he lay awake, haunted by the knowledge that he was failing them. Archon's wife, Alara, worked tirelessly to care for their 5 children, but the unrelenting poverty left little room for tenderness. She was a woman of quiet strength, her hands worn from endless labor, her heart burdened with the knowledge that there was no way out of their misery. Zania, the eldest of the children, had inherited her mother's resilience, but also a beauty that seemed out of place in their bleak surroundings. Her ethereal features, with eyes the color of the deep Arendor skies just before a storm, set her apart in a world where beauty was a luxury few could afford to notice. As Zania matured, her beauty became both a blessing and a curse. It drew the eyes of those around her, but it also drew something darker, a desire that had nothing to do with admiration and everything to do with possession. Zania was aware of the way people looked at her, the lingering gazes that made her skin crawl. She had learned to avoid the eyes of men who saw her not as a person, but as something to be claimed. But none of those gazes made her as uneasy as the one she felt now, from the shadows of their small home. Zeski, a wealthy merchant known for his cruelty and insatiable greed, had come to their door that evening, and the air inside the house seemed to thicken with his presence. He was tall and imposing, with a face as sharp as the knives he was rumored to carry beneath his robes. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room before finally settling on Zinnia, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his thin lips. Archon's heart pounded in his chest as he faced Zeski. The offer the merchant had made was as tempting as it was terrifying. A sum of money that would keep his family fed and sheltered for years, money that could lift them out of the crushing poverty that had defined their lives. But the price Zeski demanded in return made Archon's blood run cold. He glanced at Zinnia, his eldest daughter, standing by the doorway, her slender frame tense and her eyes wide with fear. "Think of your other children." Archon Zeski's voice was smooth, almost soothing, as if he were discussing a simple business transaction and not the fate of a young girl. This sum could save them from starvation. It could provide them with a future. Archon swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew Zania could hear every word, and the thought of what he was considering filled him with shame. But he also knew that the money Zeski offered could mean the difference between life and death for the rest of his family. The harsh reality of their situation weighed heavily on him, pressing him toward a decision he knew he would never forgive himself for making. Zinnia's heart raced as she watched her father. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the desperation that clouded his judgment. She wanted to speak, to beg him not to do this, but the words stuck in her throat, trapped by the fear that had gripped her since the moment Zeski had arrived. She had heard stories of young girls taken by men like Zeski, stories that ended in misery and despair. The thought of becoming one of those stories terrified her, but she also knew the burden her family carried. The thought of her siblings going hungry, of her mother wearing herself down even further, was a weight she had borne for as long as she could remember. "Father, please." Zania's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tense silence like a knife. Archon flinched at the sound of her plea, his eyes closing for a moment, as if he could block out the reality of the situation. Zeski's smile faded, his eyes narrowing as he watched the exchange. "Archon," he said, his voice now cold and commanding, "do not be foolish. This is an opportunity you cannot afford to pass up. The girl will be well taken care of. She will want for nothing." Archon opened his eyes, the weight of Zeski's words pressing down on him. He looked at Zinnia, her wide eyes full of fear and desperation, and he felt something inside him break. The choice was no longer a matter of right or wrong, it was a matter of survival. With a trembling hand, he reached for Zeski's outstretched palm. "I accept." Archon's voice cracked as he spoke, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Zania felt as though the ground had given way beneath her. The air seemed to leave the room all at once, and she was left gasping for breath, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Her father had sold her like a piece of livestock to a man she feared more than anything. Zeski's smile returned, more sinister than before. He clasped Archon's hand with a firm grip, sealing the deal. "You have made a wise decision," Zeski said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The arrangements will be made immediately. Xenia will come with me tomorrow." Archon nodded numbly, unable to look at his daughter as Zeski turned to leave. The door closed behind the merchant, and with it, any hope Xenia had clung to seemed to vanish. The room was silent. The only sound the distant howling of the wind outside, a mournful echo of the despair that now filled Xenia's heart. Alara moved toward Xenia, her face pale and her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She reached out to her daughter, but Xenia recoiled, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and betrayal. "Mother, how could he?" She choked out, her voice breaking. Alara's hands fell to her sides, helpless. "He did what he thought was best, Xenia, for all of us." Xenia shook her head, backing away from her mother. "I'm not a sacrifice to be made. I'm your daughter." Tears finally spilled from Alara's eyes, but she had no words of comfort to offer. The reality was that they were all trapped in this life, bound by the chains of poverty that left them with no choices, only sacrifices. And Xenia had just been made the ultimate one. The night passed in a blur for Xenia. Sleep eluded her as she lay on the thin mattress in the corner of the room she shared with her siblings. Their soft breathing was the only sound, a small comfort in the darkness that now seemed endless. Xenia's mind raced, grasping for some way out of the nightmare her life had become, but there was none. The deal had been made, and by morning her fate would be sealed. When the first light of dawn crept through the small, dirty window, Xenia knew it was time. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rose from her bed, the cold air biting at her skin. She dressed slowly, her hands shaking as she pulled on the simple garments that had been her only clothing for years. She glanced around the room, at the worn walls and the few possessions she had known her entire life, knowing she would never see them again. As she stepped outside, the sky was a dull, foreboding gray, mirroring the dread that settled in her chest. Zeski's transport was waiting, a sleek, black vessel that stood in stark contrast to the crumbling buildings around it. Xenia's father stood by the door, his face pale and drawn. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes as she approached, and she knew he was as broken as she was by what was about to happen. "Xenia," he began, his voice weak, but she cut him off. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice trembling with the effort to hold back her tears. "Just don't." Archon's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. He watched helplessly as Xenia turned away from him and walked toward the transport, her steps slow and heavy. The door opened as she approached, and Zeski stepped out, his expression one of smug satisfaction. "Are you ready, my dear?" he asked, his voice oily and condescending. Xenia looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I have no choice," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Zeski's smile widened. "That's right, but you'll find that life with me has its rewards." He stepped aside, motioning for her to enter the transport. With one last glance at her family, her mother standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her siblings huddled inside, unaware of what was happening, Xenia stepped into the transport. The door closed behind her with a final, echoing thud, sealing her fate. As the transport lifted off, leaving the only home she had ever known behind, Xenia felt a cold, hollow emptiness settle in her chest. She was being taken to a life she had never wanted, by a man she could never love, all for the sake of her family's survival. The bleak landscape of Arendor stretched out beneath her, a reflection of the desolation she felt inside. In that moment, Xenia vowed to herself that no matter what happened, she would survive. She would endure whatever trials lay ahead, and she would find a way to reclaim her life no matter the cost. The journey to Zeski's estate was a blur of cold, sterile silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the transport's engines as it sliced through the arid skies of Arendor. Xenia sat rigid in her seat, her heart pounding in her chest as the barren landscape flashed by below. The further they flew from her childhood home, the more distant her memories seemed, like shadows in the recesses of her mind, fading with each passing moment. The only thing that felt real was the growing knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Zeski sat across from her, his sharp eyes fixed on her with a mixture of calculation and something darker, a possessive gleam that made her skin crawl. He had barely spoken since they left the settlement, content to watch her in silence, as if assessing his latest acquisition. Xania kept her gaze averted, staring out the small window at the endless expanse of desert below, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited her. The transport finally began its descent, the engines whining as they approached Zeski's estate. Xania's breath caught in her throat as the sprawling complex came into view, an oasis of opulence in the middle of the desolation, its gleaming towers and lush gardens a stark contrast to the poverty she had known all her life. The estate was surrounded by high walls, topped with shimmering energy barriers that crackled faintly in the early morning light. It was a fortress, built to keep the world out and its inhabitants in. As the transport touched down on the landing pad, Xania's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had no idea what awaited her inside those walls, but she knew one thing for certain: she was walking into a prison, gilded though it might be. The door of the transport hissed open, and Zeski stood, his expression unreadable. He extended a hand toward Xania, a gesture that might have seemed chivalrous if not for the cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Come, my dear," he said smoothly. "Your new home awaits." Xania hesitated for a fraction of a second before forcing herself to rise from her seat. She ignored his outstretched hand, stepping past him and onto the landing pad. The air was warmer here, scented with the sweet perfume of exotic flowers that lined the path leading to the main entrance. It was a stark contrast to the dry, barren air of the desert beyond the walls, and it only heightened the surreal feeling that had taken hold of her since she left her home. Zeski led the way, his stride confident and unhurried. Servants, dressed in crisp uniforms, lined the path, bowing deeply as he passed. Their eyes flickered briefly over Xania before lowering respectfully, their expressions carefully neutral. She could sense their curiosity, their unspoken questions, but none dared to speak. They were as much a part of this place as the marble statues that adorned the gardens, silent, obedient, and entirely at Zeski's command. The grand entrance hall of the estate was a masterpiece of architecture, with soaring ceilings and intricately carved pillars that gleamed in the soft, golden light. Rich tapestries depicting scenes from Arendor's ancient history adorned the walls, and the floors were made of polished stone that reflected the light like a mirror. It was a place designed to impress, to overwhelm the senses with its beauty and opulence. But to Xania, it felt cold and hollow, a monument to wealth and power devoid of any warmth or humanity. She felt small and insignificant in the vast space, a mere pawn in a game she had never asked to play. Zeski paused in the center of the hall, turning to face her. "This is your new home, Xania," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Everything you see here is yours now, as my wife." The word wife hung in the air like a curse, and Xania couldn't suppress the shiver that ran down her spine. She had never wanted this, never dreamed of a life like this, and yet here she was bound to a man she did not love, in a place that felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Zeski seemed to sense her discomfort, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "You'll find that life here has its advantages," he continued. "You will want for nothing. All I ask in return is that you fulfill your duties as my wife." Xenia's heart clenched at the implication in his words, but she forced herself to stand tall, meeting his gaze with as much defiance as she could muster. "I did not choose this life," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I will do what I must to survive." Zeski's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with a twisted amusement. "Good," he said, his tone patronizing. "You'll find that obedience is rewarded in this house. And I expect nothing less from you, Xania." He turned away from her then, signaling for one of the servants to step forward. A tall, stern-looking woman with silver hair and a severe expression approached, bowing deeply before Zeski. "This is Lyra," Zeski said, gesturing to the woman. "She will be your personal attendant. She will show you to your quarters and help you settle in." Lyra nodded respectfully, her expression unreadable. "Follow me, please," she said, her voice as cold and precise as the rest of her demeanor. Xania followed Lyra through a series of long, winding corridors, each more lavishly decorated than the last. The estate was a maze of opulence, designed to dazzle and disorient. Xania felt as though she were walking through a dream, one where every turn led her deeper into a world she did not understand. They finally arrived at a set of double doors, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change in the light. Lyra pushed the doors open, revealing a suite of rooms that were as luxurious as they were imposing. The main chamber was dominated by a massive bed draped in silken sheets, with tall windows that overlooked the estate's gardens. Rich fabrics and ornate furnishings filled the space, every detail carefully designed to reflect the wealth and power of its owner. "This will be your chamber," Lyra said, her tone devoid of warmth. "If you need anything, you may summon me." Xenia nodded absently, her eyes drifting over the room. It was beautiful, in its own way, but it felt alien to her, cold, impersonal, and entirely at odds with the simple life she had known. She stepped further into the room, her feet sinking into the plush carpet, and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The events of the past days, the forced marriage, the journey to this place had drained her of all energy. She longed for sleep, for a moment of respite from the turmoil that had become her life. But as she approached the bed, she noticed something that made her pause: a small, ornate chest at the foot of the bed, its lid slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, she knelt down and opened the chest fully, her breath catching in her throat at the sight inside. The chest was filled with jewelry, glittering necklaces, bracelets, and rings, each piece more extravagant than the last. The gemstones sparkled in the light, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the walls. But it wasn't the jewelry itself that caught Xenia's attention, it was what lay beneath it. At the bottom of the chest, partially covered by the jewels, was a simple, worn journal. The leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. It was an incongruous sight amidst the wealth of the chest, and Xenia felt a strange sense of unease as she reached for it. She hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Lyra had left the room, before carefully lifting the journal out of the chest. The leather was soft and supple under her fingers, and she felt an odd sense of familiarity as she held it in her hands. There was no title, no name on the cover, just a simple, unadorned book that seemed out of place in the lavish surroundings. Xenia opened the journal slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the pages. The handwriting inside was delicate and flowing, the ink faded but still legible. She skimmed through the first few entries, her eyes widening as she realized what she was reading. The journal belonged to a woman named Celine, Zeski's first wife. Xenia's breath caught in her throat as she read the entries, each one a glimpse into the life of a woman who had once been in her position. Celine had been brought to the estate under similar circumstances, a young woman with no choice but to accept her fate. The entries were filled with longing and despair, the words of a woman trapped in a life she had never wanted. As Xenia read, a picture began to form in her mind, a picture of a woman who had been broken by the very life Xenia now faced. The entries spoke of loneliness, of a deep and abiding sadness that had consumed Celine over time. There were mentions of Zeski's cruelty, of his increasing frustration as the years passed and Celine failed to bear him an heir. Xenia felt a chill run down her spine as she reached the final entries. Celine's handwriting had become shaky, the words more desperate, as if she were clinging to the journal as her only source of solace. The last entry was dated just a few weeks before her death, and the words were barely legible, scrawled across the page in a frantic hand. "I fear he will kill me if I do not give him what he wants. I cannot go on like this. There is no escape, no hope. I pray that someone, someday, will be strong enough to survive this place. I was not." Xenia closed the journal slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of Celine's words settled heavily on her, a grim reminder of the reality she now faced. Zeski had driven his first wife to despair, and Xenia could feel the same darkness creeping into her own heart. But she was determined not to let it consume her. Celine's fate would not be hers. Xenia would find a way to survive no matter what it took. She would endure the trials ahead, and she would not let Zeski break her. With renewed resolve, Xenia carefully placed the journal back in the chest, hiding it beneath the layers of jewelry. She stood, her gaze steely as she looked around the room that was now her prison. This place might have been designed to control her, to mold her into the obedient wife Zeski desired, but Xenia would not be broken. She would play the role she was forced into, but she would never lose herself in the process. As she lay down on the silken sheets that night, her mind whirred with plans, her heart steeling itself for the challenges to come. Xenia had been sold into this life, but she was determined to make it her own, to find a way to survive and maybe, just maybe, to escape. For now, she would bide her time. She would learn the ways of this house, understand its secrets, and wait for the moment when she could take back the control that had been stolen from her. And when that moment came, Xenia would be ready. The days that followed were a blur of monotony and isolation. Xenia was shown the estate in its entirety, a vast labyrinth of rooms, corridors, and gardens that seemed to stretch on forever. Each area was more lavish than the last, filled with treasures from across the galaxy, but all of it felt cold and lifeless, a testament to Zeski's wealth, but devoid of any real warmth or comfort. Lyra, her attendant, was always close by, watching her with the same unreadable expression. The older woman spoke only when necessary, her words clipped and efficient. Xenia quickly realized that Lyra was more than just a servant, she was a guardian of sorts, a silent observer tasked with ensuring Xenia's obedience. Zeski himself was often absent, attending to his various business ventures across Arendor. When he was present, his interactions with Xenia were minimal, polite but distant, as if she were an accessory to be displayed rather than a partner. He expected her to attend to the social functions he hosted, to smile and look beautiful at his side, but beyond that, he showed little interest in her. But Xenia could feel the weight of his expectations bearing down on her, the unspoken demand that she fulfill the role he had forced upon her. Every day she felt the pressure to conform, to mold herself into the obedient wife Zeski desired. And every day she resisted, holding on to the flicker of defiance that burned within her. She spent her days wandering the estate, familiarizing herself with its many nooks and crannies. She explored the gardens, the endless corridors, the hidden rooms that lay behind locked doors. She learned the routines of the servants, the comings and goings of the guests, the unspoken rules that governed life within the estate. And at night, when the estate was quiet and the weight of her situation pressed down on her most heavily, she would take out Celine's journal and read. The words of the woman who had come before her were both a comfort and a warning, a reminder of the dangers she faced, but also a source of strength. Xenia was determined to survive this place, to outlast the darkness that had claimed Celine. She would not be broken by Zeski, no matter how hard he tried to mold her into the perfect wife. She would find a way to reclaim her life, to escape this gilded cage, and to live on her own terms. And as the days turned into weeks, Xenia's resolve only grew stronger. She might be trapped in this life for now, but she knew that her story was far from over. She would endure, she would survive, and one day she would be free. The endless sands of Arendor stretched out beneath the burning sun, an unforgiving expanse that seemed to swallow everything in its path. The sky, a relentless dome of bleached blue, offered no reprieve from the heat that beat down upon the barren land. In this desolate place, where life clung to existence by the thinnest of threads, survival was a test of endurance, will, and sheer luck. Xenia stumbled through the desert, her steps heavy and unsteady, as if the very ground beneath her feet conspired to pull her down into the depths of despair. The sun, a merciless orb hanging high in the sky, had long since drained her of the last vestiges of strength. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her throat raw from thirst, and every breath she took felt like inhaling fire. Days had passed since Zeski had cast her out, days that had blurred together in a haze of heat, exhaustion, and despair. She had wandered aimlessly through the desert, driven by a desperate need to escape the nightmare her life had become. But the further she walked, the more hopeless her situation seemed. The desert was vast, endless, and unforgiving, and Xenia was nothing more than a fragile, broken figure lost in its midst. She had no idea where she was, no sense of direction or purpose. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, had to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even as her body screamed for rest, for water, for the comfort of cool shade. But there was no shade in the desert, no water, and no rest. Only the relentless sun and the endless sand. The memory of Zeski's cold, disdainful eyes haunted her with every step she took. He had not even deigned to look at her as he ordered her removal from his estate. To him, she had become useless, a failure. The word echoed in her mind, taunting her with its finality. Useless, worthless, a barren woman who could not give him the heir he so desperately desired. Xenia's heart ached with the weight of her failure, not just to Zeski, but to herself. She had tried to survive, to endure the life that had been forced upon her, but in the end she had been cast aside like so much debris, discarded without a second thought. The despair she had fought to keep at bay now threatened to consume her entirely, a dark void that beckoned her to give up, to let go. But something deep within her refused to yield, a stubborn flicker of life that clung to the hope that there might still be a way out, a way to survive. It was this faint hope that kept her moving, step by agonizing step, through the desert that seemed determined to claim her. Her thoughts drifted back to her family, the faces of her siblings, her mother's weary smile, and her father's haunted eyes. She had left them behind, sacrificed herself for their survival, and now she wondered if they even remembered her. Had they mourned her loss? Or had they simply moved on, relieved to have one less mouth to feed? The thought sent a pang of sorrow through her chest, a sharp reminder of the life she had once known, the life that now felt like a distant dream. She had no way of knowing where her family was now. The last time she had tried to return to the settlement, she had found it abandoned, the buildings empty and desolate. Her family had moved on, seeking refuge elsewhere, leaving no trace behind. Xenia had searched the area, desperate for any sign of where they might have gone, but there had been nothing, no tracks, no messages, nothing to indicate where they had fled to. The realization that she was truly alone had hit her with the force of a blow, and it was in that moment that she had felt the first stirrings of despair. It was a despair that had only grown as the days passed, as her search for her family proved fruitless, and as the desert began to close in around her, a vast, unrelenting void that threatened to swallow her whole. Now, as she stumbled through the shifting sands, her body weak and trembling, Xenia felt the edges of her vision begin to blur. The world around her wavered, the heat distorting the landscape into a twisted mirage of reality. She blinked, trying to focus, but her eyelids felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish. The sun beat down on her mercilessly, and she felt her strength ebbing away with every passing moment. She knew she was close to the end. Her body could not go on much longer, not without water, without rest. Her mind screamed at her to keep moving, to fight, but her body refused to obey, too exhausted, too drained to take another step. She could feel the heat of the sand beneath her feet, the way it seemed to burn through the thin soles of her shoes, but even that pain was fading, replaced by a numbness that spread through her limbs. Xenia's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, the sand soft and yielding beneath her. She lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, her vision swimming with darkness. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out, her body collapsing back into the sand. It was too much. She couldn't do it. She couldn't fight any longer. A tear slid down her cheek, mingling with the sweat and dust that clung to her skin. She had tried so hard, fought so hard, but in the end, it was all for nothing. She was going to die here, alone in the desert, forgotten by the world, her life nothing more than a fleeting memory. The darkness closed in around her, and Xenia felt herself slipping away, her consciousness fading. The world grew distant, the sound of the wind in her ears a dull, faraway whisper. Her last thought was of her family, of the life she had lost, of the love she had never known. And then, there was nothing but darkness. The next thing Xenia was aware of was a cool, damp cloth being pressed to her forehead. She groaned softly, her eyelids fluttering as she struggled to open her eyes. Her body felt heavy, as if it were made of lead, and her mind was sluggish, the edges of her consciousness still fuzzy and indistinct. "Easy now," a voice murmured, low and soothing. "You're safe." Xenia's eyes finally opened, and she found herself staring up at an unfamiliar ceiling, the soft glow of artificial light casting gentle shadows across the room. The air was cool, a welcome relief from the searing heat of the desert, and the bed beneath her was soft, the sheets smooth and clean against her skin. She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling on the figure sitting beside the bed, a man, his features partially obscured by the shadows. His expression was one of concern, his brow furrowed as he looked down at her. His clothes were simple, practical, the kind worn by those who spent their days working hard, not by someone who lived in luxury. Xenia blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, where her voice was hoarse, her throat dry, and the word came out as little more than a croak. "You're safe," the man repeated, his voice gentle. He dipped the cloth into a basin of water and pressed it to her lips, letting the cool liquid trickle into her mouth. "Drink slowly." The water was the sweetest thing Xenia had ever tasted, a balm to her parched throat. She sipped it gratefully, feeling some of the fog in her mind begin to lift. Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice still weak but clearer now. The man smiled faintly, his expression softening. "My name is Luke," he said. "I found you in the desert, unconscious. You were in bad shape, but we managed to bring you back." Desert Xenia's mind struggled to piece together the fragments of her memory. The last thing she remembered was collapsing in the sand, certain that she was going to die. And now she was here, in this cool, safe place, with a man she had never seen before. "You're in my colony," Luke continued, his voice steady and calm. "We're a small group of settlers, mostly humans, trying to make a life on this planet. It's not easy, but we manage." Xania blinked again, trying to absorb his words. A colony. She had heard of such settlements scattered across Arendor, but she had never seen one up close. The settlers were a hardy bunch, people who had come to this harsh planet seeking a new start, a chance to build something of their own. They were known for their resilience, their determination to survive in the face of adversity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved my life." Luke's smile widened, a warmth in his eyes that put her at ease. "I couldn't just leave you out there," he said simply. "You look like you'd been through hell." Xenia nodded slowly, the memories of her time with Zeski, her desperate search for her family, and the days of wandering through the desert all coming back to her in a rush. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it was not one of despair, but of relief. Luke reached out, gently wiping the tear away with his thumb. "You're safe now," he repeated softly. "You don't have to go through this alone anymore." The kindness in his voice, the compassion in his touch, were almost too much for Xenia to bear. She had been so alone for so long, trapped in a life she had never wanted, fighting to survive against all odds. And now here was this man, offering her a lifeline, a chance at something different, something better. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Luke's expression softened even further, and he sat back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he said quietly. "I don't know what you've been through, but I can see it in your eyes. You've been hurt, betrayed, and cast aside. But that doesn't mean you're beyond saving. You're stronger than you think, Xenia, and I'm here to help you find that strength again." Xenia's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. This man, this kind, gentle stranger, was offering her a way out of the darkness that had consumed her life. He was offering her a chance to start over, to rebuild herself from the ashes of her past. Tears filled her eyes and she let them fall, unashamed, as she looked up at Luke. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Luke smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his face. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just focus on getting better. We'll take it one step at a time, together." Xenia nodded, her heart filled with gratitude and something she had not felt in a long time, hope. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and struggles she could not yet foresee. But for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. She had someone by her side, someone who believed in her, who saw her not as a failure, but as someone worth saving. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. In the days that followed, Xenia slowly regained her strength. The members of the colony welcomed her with open arms, offering her food, water, and a place to stay. They were a diverse group, hailing from different planets and backgrounds, but they had come together to create a community in this harsh, unforgiving land. They worked hard, side by side, to cultivate the small patches of arable land they had found, to build homes and shelters, to protect each other from the dangers of the desert. Xenia was struck by the sense of camaraderie and unity that permeated the colony. These were people who had faced their own trials and tribulations, who had chosen to fight for a better life despite the odds. And now they were offering her a place among them, a chance to start anew. Luke was a constant presence at her side, checking on her progress, offering words of encouragement, and sharing stories of the colony's struggles and triumphs. He was a natural leader, calm and steady, with a quiet strength that inspired those around him. And as Xenia spent more time with him, she found herself drawn to him not just for his kindness, but for the way he saw the world, the way he believed in the possibility of a better future, even in the face of adversity. As her strength returned, Xenia began to contribute to the colony, helping with the daily tasks and chores. She found solace in the routine, in the simple act of working alongside others, of being part of something larger than herself. The pain of her past, while still present, began to fade, replaced by the sense of purpose and belonging that the colony provided. But the memories of her time with Zeski still haunted her, especially at night, when the darkness closed in and the silence of the desert seemed to amplify her fears. She would wake in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the echo of Zeski's cruel words ringing in her ears. It was in those moments that she would seek out Luke, drawn to his presence like a beacon of light in the darkness. One night, unable to sleep, Xenia found herself wandering through the colony, her steps leading her to the small clearing where Luke often spent his evenings, gazing up at the stars. She found him there, sitting on a low rock, his face tilted up to the sky, his expression serene. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning, as if sensing her presence before she even spoke. Zinnia nodded, her arms wrapped around herself as she approached. "I keep thinking about everything," she admitted quietly. "It's hard to let it go." Luke turned to her then, his eyes filled with understanding. "You've been through a lot," he said gently. "It's going to take time to heal. But you're not alone, Zinnia. We're all here for you." She sat down beside him, the cool night air a welcome relief against her skin. For a moment they sat in silence, gazing up at the stars that twinkled like diamonds in the velvety sky. The vastness of the universe stretched out above them, a reminder of how small their struggles were in the grand scheme of things, and yet how significant they felt in their own lives. "Do you ever wonder why we're here?" Zinnia asked after a while, her voice soft. "Why we keep fighting, even when everything seems so hopeless?" Luke smiled faintly, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "All the time," he admitted. "But I think it's because we believe in something better. We believe that no matter how hard things get, there's always a chance for something good to come out of it. That's why we keep fighting, because we have hope." Zinnia looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of admiration and affection. "You really believe that, don't you?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Luke finally turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "I do," he said simply. "And I believe in you, Zinnia. I've seen your strength, your resilience. You've survived so much, and yet here you are, still standing, still fighting. That's something to be proud of." Tears welled up in Zinnia's eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of hope. She reached out, taking Luke's hand in hers, feeling the warmth of his skin against her own. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." Luke squeezed her hand gently, his smile warm and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You've already proven that you're worth believing in. The rest is up to you." Zinnia nodded, a sense of peace settling over her for the first time in what felt like forever. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, that there would be challenges and obstacles she could not yet foresee. But for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them because she was not alone. She had found a new home, a new family, and a man who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a victim, but as a survivor. And with that knowledge, Zinnia knew that she could face whatever came next. The desert had tried to break her, but it had failed. She was still standing, still fighting, and she would continue to do so, no matter what. Because now she had something worth fighting for. The early morning air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the desert that would soon rise with the sun. Zinnia stood at the edge of the settlement, her eyes scanning the horizon as the first light of dawn crept over the distant dunes. The desert, which had once been a place of torment and despair, now held a different meaning for her. It was still vast and unforgiving, but it no longer felt like the end of the world. It was simply another challenge to be faced, another test of her resilience. Behind her, the settlement hummed with quiet activity as the colonists began their day. The small, makeshift buildings that made up the colony were modest, built from the materials available on this harsh planet. But they were sturdy, crafted with care and determination by the settlers who had come here to carve out a new life. The colony was not much to look at, but to Zinnia, it had become a symbol of hope, a place where she had found safety, companionship, and a sense of belonging. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Zinnia had gone from being a cast-off, left to die in the desert, to being embraced by a community that valued her for who she was, not what she could give them. It was a transformation she still struggled to fully comprehend, but one she was deeply grateful for. Her thoughts drifted to Luke, the man who had found her in the desert and brought her back from the brink of death. His kindness and unwavering belief in her had been a lifeline when she had needed it most. In the time since her rescue, their bond had only grown stronger, forged through shared experiences and a deepening trust. Luke had become her anchor in this new life, and though she still felt a pang of fear when she thought about what lay ahead, she knew she could face it with him by her side. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention, and she turned to see Luke walking toward her, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. He carried a small pack slung over one shoulder, and his expression was one of quiet determination. Zinnia felt a surge of warmth in her chest at the sight of him, and she smiled despite herself. Morning Luke greeted her, his voice low and steady as he came to stand beside her. He followed her gaze out to the horizon, where the dunes shimmered like gold in the early light. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Xenia admitted, her voice tinged with a hint of anxiety. "I kept thinking about everything." Luke nodded, his expression softening as he turned to look at her. "It's normal to feel that way," he said gently. "You've been through a lot, and it's going to take time to process it all. But you don't have to go through it alone, Xenia. We're all here for you." Xenia's smile faltered slightly as she looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of his words. "I know," she murmured, "and I'm so grateful for that. But sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Like I'm still that girl who was sold off, who was abandoned in the desert. It's hard to shake that feeling." Luke reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You're not that girl anymore," he said firmly. "You've survived things that would have broken most people, and you've come out stronger because of it. You belong here, Xenia, with us. With me." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Xenia's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to appear weak. But Luke's hand remained on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady, grounding her in the present. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where I'd be without you, Luke." Luke's expression softened even further, and he lowered his hand to take hers, intertwining their fingers. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "I'm just glad I found you when I did." Xenia looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing between them ever since the day he had saved her life. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever happened, she wanted Luke to be a part of it. The sound of a distant commotion drew their attention, and they both turned to see a group of colonists gathering near the central square. Luke's brow furrowed in concern, and he squeezed Xenia's hand before releasing it. "Let's go see what's going on," he said, his tone shifting to one of quiet authority. Xenia nodded, and together they made their way toward the square, where the rest of the colony was starting to converge. As they approached, Xenia could hear the anxious murmurs of the colonists, their voices filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. At the center of the gathering stood a man and a woman, both dressed in worn, dust-covered clothes, their faces etched with exhaustion. They were strangers to Xenia, and from the looks on the faces of the other colonists, they were strangers to them as well. Luke stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of the crowd. The colonists parted to let him through, and he approached the newcomers with a calm, steady demeanor. "Who are you?" Luke asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "And what brings you to our settlement?" The man, who appeared to be in his late 30s, stepped forward, his expression one of desperation. "My name is Torin," he said, his voice rough from thirst. "And this is my wife, Alara. We've been traveling through the desert for days, looking for a place to take refuge. Our settlement was destroyed by raiders, and we had no choice but to flee." The mention of raiders sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, and Xenia felt a chill run down her spine. Raiders were a constant threat on Arendor, bands of lawless scavengers who preyed on vulnerable settlements, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. The thought of them being so close to the colony filled her with dread. Luke's expression hardened slightly, but his tone remained calm. "You're safe here," he said, his words carrying a sense of reassurance. "We'll take you in, give you food and water. But tell me, how far behind are the raiders? Are they coming this way?" Torin shook his head, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I don't think so," he replied. "They seemed more interested in looting our settlement than chasing us down. But we didn't stay to find out, we just ran." Alara, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "Please, we've lost everything," she said, her eyes pleading. "We just want a place where we can be safe, where we can start over." Luke nodded, his expression softening as he took in their plight. "You're welcome to stay with us," he said. "We'll do what we can to help you get back on your feet." The relief on Torin and Alara's faces was palpable, and they both thanked Luke profusely, their gratitude evident in every word. Xenia watched the exchange, her heart swelling with pride for Luke and the way he handled the situation. He had a way of making people feel safe, of giving them hope even in the darkest of times. It was one of the many things she admired about him. As the colonists began to disperse, returning to their daily tasks, Luke turned to Xenia, his expression thoughtful. "We'll need to stay vigilant," he said quietly. "If there are raiders in the area, we can't afford to let our guard down." Xenia nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll help in any way I can," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever you need, just tell me." Luke smiled faintly, his eyes warm as he looked at her. "Thank you, Xenia," he said. "I know I can count on you." Over the next few days, the colony prepared for the possibility of a raid. They reinforced the barriers around the settlement, stockpiled supplies, and organized a rotation of watchmen to keep an eye on the horizon. Xenia threw herself into the work, eager to contribute and to prove to herself that she was more than just a burden. She trained with some of the other colonists, learning how to defend herself and how to use the rudimentary weapons they had at their disposal. Luke was a constant presence during these preparations, offering guidance and encouragement to the colonists as they worked. His calm demeanor and steady leadership helped to ease the tension that had settled over the settlement, and Xenia found herself drawing strength from his example. She was determined to do her part, to protect the place that had become her home and the people who had become her family. Despite the preparations, there was an undercurrent of fear that permeated the settlement. The memory of what had happened to Torin in Alera's settlement was fresh in everyone's minds, and the thought of facing a similar fate was a terrifying prospect. But there was also a sense of determination, a resolve to stand together and defend what they had built. As the days passed and no sign of raiders appeared, the tension in the settlement began to ease, though no one let their guard down completely. Life in the colony returned to a semblance of normalcy, and Xenia found herself settling into a routine. She continued to help with the daily tasks, but she also spent more time with Luke, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, after a long day of work, Xenia found herself sitting with Luke in the same clearing where they had shared so many quiet moments together. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of desert insects. It was a peaceful moment, a respite from the worries that had plagued them for so long. Xenia leaned back against the rock, her eyes drifting over the horizon. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with curiosity. Luke looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "Erindor is a harsh place, and there are times when I wonder if it's worth it. But then I think about the people here, the community we've built, and I know I can't leave them behind. This is my home now, and I've made a commitment to these people. I can't just walk away from that." Xenia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You're a good leader, Luke," she said softly. "You care about these people, and they look up to you. I can see why they trust you." Luke smiled, a hint of humility in his expression. "I'm just doing what I can," he said. "But I couldn't do it without people like you, Xenia. You've brought so much to this colony, more than you realize. You've shown incredible strength, and you've inspired others to do the same." Xenia felt a flush of warmth in her cheeks at his words, and she looked away, feeling a bit shy under his praise. "I'm just trying to find my place," she said quietly. "It's not easy, but I think I'm getting there." Luke reached out, taking her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. "You've already found your place," he said gently. "Right here, with us. With me." Xenia looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. The connection between them was undeniable, a bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. She had never felt anything like this before, this deep sense of trust and affection, and it both thrilled and terrified her. "Luke," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want you to be a part of it. I want to stay here with you, with the colony. I want to build something together." Luke's eyes softened and he leaned in closer, his gaze locking with hers. "I want that too, Xenia," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "More than anything." The distance between them seemed to disappear in that moment, and before Xenia knew it, Luke was leaning in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss filled with promise, with the unspoken understanding that they were both stepping into something new, something that had the potential to change everything. Xenia's heart soared as she returned the kiss, her hands slipping around Luke's neck as she pulled him closer. The warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against hers, filled her with a sense of belonging, of finally finding the place she was meant to be. When they finally pulled away, both breathless and smiling, Xenia felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She rested her forehead against Luke's, their breaths mingling in the cool evening air. "Whatever comes," Luke whispered, his voice filled with quiet determination, "we'll face it together." Zinnia nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek as she smiled. Together she echoed, her heart filled with hope and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of twilight, Zinnia knew that her life had taken a turn she had never expected. She had gone from being lost in the desert, abandoned and broken, to finding a new home, a new family, and a love that filled her with a sense of purpose. The challenges they faced were far from over. There would be more trials, more dangers, more moments of doubt, but Zinnia knew that she was not alone. With Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future held, confident that together they could overcome anything. And for the first time in a long time, Zinnia felt truly alive. She had found her place in the world, and she was determined to make the most of it. The following days were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Zinnia and Luke continued to work together, leading the colony with a shared vision for the future. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, their connection deepening as they faced the challenges of life on Arendor together. The colonists, too, seemed to draw strength from the unity they saw in their leaders. There was a sense of optimism in the air, a belief that they could overcome whatever obstacles came their way. It was a far cry from the fear and uncertainty that had plagued them in the past, and it was clear that Zinnia and Luke's relationship was at the heart of that transformation. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Luke's modest home, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, Zinnia felt a sense of contentment she had never known before. The colony was thriving, the people were united, and she had found a place where she truly belonged. But even as she reveled in the peace of the moment, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her that nothing in life was ever certain. The desert was a harsh and unpredictable place, and the future was filled with unknowns. But as she leaned into Luke's embrace, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And that, she realized, was all she needed. The night was calm, the desert winds whispering through the settlement, carrying with them the promise of a new day. Zinnia closed her eyes, letting the sound of the wind lull her into a sense of peace. She had found her place in this world, and she was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that she was not alone. As she drifted off to sleep in Luke's arms, Zinnia knew that she had finally found her way home. The days after Zinnia and Luke's first kiss were a delicate dance of emotions, a blossoming of something new and beautiful amidst the harshness of Arendor. Their connection had deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated, a bond forged in adversity and tempered by mutual respect and affection. For Zinnia, it was as if a new world had opened up, one where she could finally let her guard down, where she could trust someone completely and allow herself to love. Yet, with that love came a new set of fears and insecurities, wounds from her past that still lingered just beneath the surface, threatening to resurface at any moment. She had been through so much, experienced such deep betrayal and loss, that the idea of letting someone into her heart felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But each day Luke showed her that love did not have to be a source of pain. With every smile, every gentle touch, every shared moment, he proved that love could be a source of strength, a balm to heal the scars of the past. Their relationship grew in quiet, unspoken ways. They spent more time together, working side by side in the colony, their hands and hearts united in a shared purpose. Whether they were overseeing the construction of a new shelter, tending to the small but thriving crops, or organizing the colony's defenses, there was a sense of unity between them that the other colonists couldn't help but notice. It was as if Zinnia and Luke had become the heart of the colony, their bond inspiring others to work harder, to believe that they could build something lasting in this harsh world. But as much as their bond deepened, Zinnia found herself grappling with the shadows of her past. There were nights when the memories of her life with Zeski would resurface, unbidden and unwelcome, pulling her back into a world of fear and helplessness. She would wake in the dark hours of the night, her heart racing, her body trembling with the echoes of old nightmares. In those moments she would seek out Luke, drawn to the safety and comfort of his presence. One such night, Zinnia found herself standing at the threshold of Luke's modest home, her breath hitching in her throat as she hesitated to knock. The moonlight cast long shadows across the settlement, the silence of the desert broken only by the distant call of a night creature. Zinnia's heart pounded in her chest as she wrestled with the fear of appearing weak, of burdening Luke with the darkness that still clung to her. But before she could turn away, the door opened, and Luke stood there, concern etched across his features. Xania, he said softly, his voice a warm balm to her frayed nerves. Are you all right? Xenia's resolve crumbled in the face of his kindness, and she nodded, though she knew the answer was far more complicated than that. I couldn't sleep, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The nightmares. Luke didn't hesitate. He reached out, gently taking her hand and guiding her inside. The warmth of his home enveloped her, the soft glow of a lantern casting a comforting light across the room. He led her to the small sitting area near the hearth, where he had clearly been reading before she arrived. A book lay open on the low table, its pages slightly worn from use, and a steaming cup of tea sat beside it, untouched. Sit down, Luke said, his voice calm and steady as he guided her to the sofa. Xenia sank into the cushions, the weight of her emotions pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. Luke sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, but he didn't push her to speak. He simply waited, his presence a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. Xenia stared down at her hands, which were trembling slightly in her lap. The nightmares had been worse tonight, vivid, relentless memories of Zeski's cruel eyes, of the suffocating feeling of being trapped, of the endless desert that had threatened to swallow her whole. She had thought she was past this, that she had moved beyond the pain, but tonight it had all come rushing back, overwhelming her in a wave of fear and despair. I keep seeing him, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. I keep seeing Zeski. And I feel like I'm back there, trapped in that life, and I can't get out. Luke's hand found hers, his fingers warm and steady as they intertwined with her own. You're not there anymore, he said gently, his voice filled with quiet conviction. You're here, with me, with the colony. You're safe now, Xenia. He can't hurt you anymore. Xenia closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks as she leaned into his touch. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know that, but it's hard to forget. It's hard to shake the fear. Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she trembled against him. His embrace was strong and comforting, a shield against the darkness that threatened to overwhelm her. You don't have to face this alone, he murmured into her hair. I'm here with you, Xenia. I'll always be here. Xenia clung to him, letting the warmth of his body seep into her, calming the storm of emotions that raged inside her. For a long time they sat there in silence, Luke holding her as she let the tears fall, releasing the pain and fear that had been festering inside her for so long. It was a cathartic release, one she hadn't realized she needed until that moment. When the tears finally subsided, Xenia pulled back slightly, her gaze meeting Luke's. His eyes were filled with concern, but also with something deeper, something that made her heart ache with longing. It was the look of someone who truly cared, who saw her not as a broken person, but as someone worth fighting for. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I'd do without you. Luke smiled, a soft, tender smile that made her heart flutter. You're stronger than you think, Xenia, he said quietly. You've been through so much, and yet you're still here, still fighting. That's something to be proud of. Xenia's heart swelled with gratitude and something more, something that had been growing inside her since the day Luke had found her in the desert. It was a feeling she had tried to push down, afraid of what it might mean, but now, sitting here with him, she couldn't deny it any longer. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid of what I feel, of getting hurt again. Luke's expression softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her cheek in his hand. I understand, he said quietly, and I won't rush you. We'll take this one step at a time at your pace. But know this, Xenia, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, no matter what. Xenia closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, letting the warmth of his hand chase away the lingering shadows of her past. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the possibility of a future where she could be happy, where she could love without fear. And in that moment, she made a decision to let go of the past and embrace the love that was right in front of her. I want to try, she said softly, opening her eyes to meet his. I want to try to love, to let myself be loved, but I need time. Luke's smile was warm and reassuring, and he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Take all the time you need, he murmured against her skin. I'll be here waiting. Xenia's heart swelled with emotion, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him close as she let herself believe in the possibility of a future filled with love and happiness. It was a future that scared her, but it was also one that she desperately wanted, a future where she could be free from the pain of her past, and build something new with the man who had shown her what it meant to be truly loved. The days turned into weeks, and Xenia found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of letting Luke into her heart. Their relationship deepened in quiet, subtle ways, each moment they spent together a testament to the trust they were building. Xenia found herself opening up to Luke in ways she had never thought possible, sharing with him the darkest parts of her past, the fears that still haunted her, and the dreams she had once thought were lost forever. Luke listened without judgment, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor that kept her grounded. He never pushed her to reveal more than she was comfortable with, and he was always there to offer a kind word or a gentle touch when she needed it most. His patience and understanding allowed Xenia to slowly rebuild the walls she had once torn down, but this time they were not walls of fear and pain, they were walls of love and trust, built on a foundation that was growing stronger every day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a warm, golden light, Xenia and Luke found themselves sitting on the porch of his home, enjoying the quiet solitude that came with the end of the day. The colony was peaceful, the day's work done, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of desert insects and the distant rustle of the wind. Xenia leaned against Luke, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. It was a simple, serene moment, one that filled her with a deep sense of contentment. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace, free from the weight of her past and the fears that had once consumed her. "Do you ever think about the future?" Xenia asked softly, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Luke turned his head slightly, his gaze shifting from the stars to her. All the time, he admitted, his voice low and thoughtful. "It's hard not to, living out here. The future is always uncertain, but that's what makes it worth fighting for." Xenia smiled, her heart swelling with affection for the man who had become her rock in this uncertain world. "What do you see when you think about the future?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Luke was silent for a moment, as if considering his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with quiet conviction. "I see a colony that thrives, that grows stronger with each passing day. I see people who care about each other, who work together to build something lasting. And I see you, Xenia, by my side, helping me make that future a reality." Xenia's heart skipped a beat at his words, and she turned her head to look at him, her eyes wide with emotion. "You really see that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Luke's gaze was steady, his eyes filled with warmth and sincerity. "I do," he said softly. "I see a future where we're together, where we build a life we can be proud of. I know it won't be easy, there will be challenges, setbacks, and times when things seem impossible. But I believe in us, Xenia. I believe we can face whatever comes our way, as long as we're together." Tears filled Xenia's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to cry in front of him. But the emotions swirling inside her were too powerful to contain, and before she knew it, she was leaning forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was filled with all the love and gratitude she felt for him. Luke responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her as he deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of a future filled with love and happiness, of a bond that would only grow stronger with time. When they finally pulled away, both breathless and smiling, Xenia rested her forehead against his, her heart filled with a sense of peace she had never known before. "I believe in us too," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet determination. "And I want that future, Luke. I want it more than anything." Luke's smile was warm and reassuring, and he gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch sending a thrill of warmth through her. "Then we'll make it happen," he said softly. "Together." Xenia nodded, her heart swelling with hope and love. For the first time in her life, she felt truly ready to embrace the future, to let go of the pain of her past and build something new with the man she loved. It was a future that was filled with unknowns, with challenges and obstacles that would test them in ways they couldn't yet foresee. But it was also a future filled with love, with hope, and with the promise of something beautiful. And with Luke by her side, Xenia knew she could face whatever came their way. The following weeks were a time of growth and transformation, both for Xenia and for the colony. The bond between her and Luke continued to deepen, their love for each other blossoming into something strong and enduring. They spent more time together, not just as leaders of the colony, but as partners in every sense of the word. Their relationship was built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect, and it was clear to everyone in the colony that they were stronger together. Xania found herself taking on more responsibilities within the colony, stepping into a leadership role that felt both natural and fulfilling. She had once been afraid of the future, of what it might hold, but now she felt a sense of purpose and determination that drove her to do everything she could to ensure the colony's success. She worked closely with Luke, organizing the colony's defenses, overseeing the construction of new buildings, and helping to manage the distribution of resources. The colonists looked up to her, not just because of her relationship with Luke, but because of the strength and resilience she had shown in the face of adversity. She had earned their respect through her actions, through the way she cared for them, and the way she worked tirelessly to make the colony a better place for everyone. One evening, as the sun was setting and the colony was winding down for the day, Xania and Luke stood together at the edge of the settlement, watching as the last rays of light disappeared behind the distant dunes. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the colors fading into deep purple as night fell over the desert. Xania leaned into Luke's side, her heart filled with a sense of contentment and peace. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Luke nodded, his arm wrapped around her waist as he pulled her closer. "It is," he agreed, his voice low and warm. "But it's nothing compared to you." Xania blushed, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she looked up at him. "You always know just what to say," she teased gently. Luke chuckled, his eyes twinkling with affection as he leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead. "Only because it's true," he murmured against her skin. Xenia sighed contentedly, her heart swelling with love for the man who had become her everything. She had never imagined that she could find happiness in a place like Arendor, but Luke had shown her that even in the harshest of environments, love could bloom and thrive. As they stood there together, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Xenia knew that she had finally found her place in the world. It was a place where she was loved and valued, where she could be herself without fear or shame. It was a place where she could build a future with the man she loved, a future that was filled with hope and possibility. And as the night settled over the desert, Xenia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had come so far from the girl who had been sold into a life of despair, who had wandered the desert alone and broken. She had found strength she hadn't known she possessed, and she had discovered a love that had healed her wounds and made her whole. Xania knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that life on Arendor would always be unpredictable and filled with hardships. But with Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. Because in the end, love was stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than anything the world could throw at them. And that was all Xania needed to know. As they stood together under the stars, holding each other close, Xenia knew that their love would endure, that it would carry them through the darkest of times and light the way to a future filled with hope and happiness. And with that knowledge, Xenia felt truly at peace. She had found her place, her purpose, and her heart. And she was ready for whatever the future held. The night sky over Arendor was a blanket of deep indigo, studded with countless stars that seemed to shimmer with a cold, distant light. The wind swept across the desert, carrying with it the faint scent of dry earth and the promise of another scorching day to come. But for now, in the cool darkness of night, the colony was quiet, the only sounds those of soft, even breathing and the occasional murmur from the watchmen patrolling the perimeter. Inside their modest home, Xenia and Luke lay entwined beneath the thin sheets of their bed, their bodies pressed close in the comforting warmth of each other's embrace. It was a night like so many others, a peaceful end to a long day of work and responsibility. Yet as Xenia stared up at the ceiling, her mind was far from peaceful. Her thoughts churned with a mixture of anticipation and fear, the weight of her worries pressing down on her like a heavy stone. Luke's arm tightened around her waist, his breath warm against the nape of her neck. "You're still awake," he murmured, his voice heavy with sleep but laced with concern. "What's on your mind?" Xenia sighed softly, turning in his arms so that she could face him. Even in the darkness, she could make out the outline of his features, the steady calm in his eyes that always seemed to soothe her frayed nerves. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to wake you." Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You didn't," he assured her. "I could tell something was bothering you. Want to talk about it?" Xenia hesitated, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest as she tried to find the right words. "It's just, I've been thinking about the future," she finally said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. about what happens next. Luke was silent for a moment, his thumb stroking gently over the back of her hand. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. Xenia bit her lip, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I want to have a family with you, Luke," she admitted, her heart pounding in her chest. "I want to have children, to raise them here with you, to build a life together. But I'm afraid." Luke's expression softened, and he reached up to cup her face in his hands, his touch warm and reassuring. "What are you afraid of?" he asked gently, his eyes searching hers. Xenia closed her eyes, the memories of her past rushing back to her in a wave of fear and doubt. "I'm afraid that I can't. That I won't be able to," she trailed off, the words catching in her throat as she tried to articulate the fears that had been gnawing at her for so long. Luke's hands tightened on her face, his voice firm but kind. "Xenia," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "You are not defined by what happened before. You're not the same person you were then. You've survived so much, and you've grown stronger because of it. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this fear alone." Tears pricked at the corners of Xenia's eyes, and she leaned into his touch, letting the warmth of his words chase away some of the coldness that had settled in her heart. "I want to believe that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But what if? What if I can't give you a family? What if something's wrong with me?" Luke's expression softened even further, and he pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her forehead in a tender kiss. "Then we'll find another way," he said quietly. "What matters to me is you, Xenia. You are my family, whether we have children or not. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." Xenia nodded, the weight of her fears lessened by his reassurance, though not entirely gone. "I want this so much, Luke," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of longing and determination. "I want to build a future with you, to share that joy with you. I just don't want to fail you." Luke smiled, his hands cradling her face as he looked deep into her eyes. "You could never fail me," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Whatever happens, I'm with you. We'll face it together, and we'll make our own future, no matter what." Xenia's heart swelled with love for the man who had shown her time and again that she was worthy of love, of happiness, of a future filled with hope. She leaned forward, capturing his lips in a soft, lingering kiss that conveyed all the emotion she couldn't put into words. Luke responded in kind, his arms tightening around her as he pulled her closer, their bodies pressed together in a tender embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Xenia felt a sense of peace settle over her, the weight of her fears momentarily forgotten in the warmth of his love. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Luke smiled, brushing a kiss against her temple. "Always," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. "I'll always be here for you, Xenia. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." Xenia nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope and determination. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges and setbacks, but with Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. And with that thought, she finally allowed herself to relax, to close her eyes and drift off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was not alone. The days that followed were filled with a sense of quiet anticipation, a shared hope that lingered in the air between Xenia and Luke. They didn't speak about it often, but there was an unspoken understanding that they were both thinking about the same thing, the possibility of starting a family, of bringing new life into the world they had worked so hard to build. Xenia threw herself into the daily tasks of the colony with renewed purpose, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She wanted so badly to believe that this time would be different, that she could leave behind the pain and disappointment of her past and embrace the future with open arms. But the fear still lingered, a shadow that refused to be fully banished. One morning, as Xenia was tending to the small garden that she and the other colonists had painstakingly cultivated, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her. She paused, gripping the edge of the planter to steady herself as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sensation passed quickly, but it left her feeling unsettled, her heart pounding in her chest. She shook her head, trying to shake off the lingering unease. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Just a momentary lapse, a result of the heat and the hard work she'd been putting in. But as the day went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, that something had shifted inside her. That evening, As she and Luke sat together on the porch of their home, Xenia couldn't keep her thoughts to herself any longer. She turned to him, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "Luke," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I think something's happening." Luke looked at her, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he took in the seriousness of her tone. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, his hand reaching out to take hers. Xenia took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around his as she tried to find the words. "I've been feeling different," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure, but I think I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of possibility. For a moment Luke was silent, his eyes searching hers for confirmation. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of hope and caution. "Are you sure?" Xenia shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I've just been feeling off, and I missed my last cycle, but I'm afraid to hope. Afraid that I'm wrong." Luke's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he murmured, his voice a steady reassurance. "But if you are pregnant, Xenia, that's incredible." Tears welled up in Xenia's eyes, and she clung to him, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I want it to be true," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I want this so much, Luke." Luke held her tighter, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Then, let's find out," he said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time, just like we always do. And no matter what, we'll get through it together." Xenia nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and love for the man who had become her rock, her anchor in this unpredictable world. She knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The following days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Xenia's symptoms persisted: waves of dizziness, bouts of nausea, and a deep, bone-weary fatigue that seemed to settle over her like a heavy blanket. She couldn't deny the signs, couldn't push away the hope that had taken root in her heart. But there was also a lingering fear, a worry that something might go wrong, that her body would betray her once again. Luke was a constant source of support during this time, his presence a steady reassurance that she wasn't alone. He didn't push her to talk about her fears, but he was always there to listen, to hold her when the doubts became too much to bear. His quiet strength gave her the courage to face each day with renewed determination, to believe that this time might be different. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, Xenia decided it was time to find out for certain. There were no medical facilities in the colony, no advanced technology to confirm a pregnancy, but one of the older women, Rhea, had a wealth of knowledge about herbal remedies and natural methods of detection. It was to her that Xenia turned, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear as she explained her symptoms. Rhea listened patiently, her weathered face thoughtful as she considered Xenia's words. "It sounds like you might be pregnant," she said finally, her voice calm and steady. "But we can't be sure until we test." Xenia nodded, her heart in her throat as she followed Rhea to a small, secluded area of the garden where the older woman had a collection of herbs and plants growing. Rhea knelt down, her hands deftly plucking a few leaves from one of the plants before crushing them in a small mortar. "This is a traditional method," Rhea explained as she worked, her voice soothing. "It's not foolproof, but it's been used for generations. The leaves of this plant react to the hormones in a woman's body. If you're pregnant, the crushed leaves will change color." Xenia watched, her breath catching in her throat, as Rhea handed her a small cloth soaked in the crushed herb mixture. "Place this on your skin," Rhea instructed gently. "Hold it there for a few moments, then remove it. If the cloth changes color, it's a sign that you're pregnant." Xenia's hands trembled as she took the cloth, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed it to the inside of her wrist, her eyes squeezed shut as she counted the seconds in her head. The air around her seemed to still, the world narrowing down to this one moment, this one test that would determine the course of her future. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she pulled the cloth away from her skin. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked down at it, her heart skipping a beat. The cloth had changed color, a faint but unmistakable shade of pink. Xenia's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes as the reality of what she was seeing sank in. She was pregnant. She was going to have a child. "Oh, Xenia," Rhea said softly, her voice filled with warmth and congratulations. "It's true then. You're going to be a mother." Xenia nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched the cloth to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, Rhea." Rhea smiled, her eyes filled with kindness. "You don't need to thank me, child," she said gently. "This is a blessing, a new beginning for you and Luke. Cherish it." Xenia nodded again, her heart filled with a mixture of joy and fear. She couldn't wait to tell Luke, to share the news that they had both been hoping for. But beneath the joy, there was also a lingering worry, a fear that something might still go wrong. She made her way back to their home, her steps light but her mind heavy with thoughts of the future. Luke was waiting for her on the porch, his eyes filled with anticipation as she approached. "Well," he asked, his voice tinged with both hope and caution. "What did Rhea say?" Xenia's eyes filled with tears as she met his gaze, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man who had stood by her through everything. She said, "It's true," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm pregnant, Luke. We're going to have a baby." For a moment Luke was silent, his eyes wide with disbelief as he processed her words. Then, in an instant, he closed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms and lifting her off the ground as he spun her around, his laughter ringing out in the stillness of the evening. "We're going to be parents," he murmured, his voice filled with awe and joy as he set her back on her feet. "Xenia, this is incredible. You're incredible." Tears streamed down Xenia's face as she clung to him, her heart filled with a mixture of joy and fear. "I'm so happy, Luke," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm also scared. What if something goes wrong?" Luke pulled back slightly, his hands cradling her face as he looked deep into her eyes. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he said firmly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We've come this far, Xenia, we can do this." Xenia nodded, her heart swelling with love for the man who had become her everything. "I know we can," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "We'll do this together." The days that followed were filled with a sense of anticipation and preparation. The news of Xenia's pregnancy spread quickly through the colony, and the colonists rallied around her and Luke, offering their congratulations and support. It was a time of celebration, of shared joy, but also of careful planning. The colony was a harsh and unpredictable place, and there were many challenges to be faced in the months ahead. Xenia threw herself into the preparations with a sense of purpose, her heart filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew that there was still a long road ahead, that there were no guarantees in this world. But with Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. As the weeks turned into months, Xenia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to her relief. The early fears and anxieties began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope and anticipation. She could feel the life growing inside her, the tiny flutterings and movements that filled her with awe and wonder. It was a miracle, a gift that she had once thought would be forever out of her reach. Luke was a constant source of support and love during this time, his presence a steady reassurance that she wasn't alone. He took on extra responsibilities within the colony, working tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place for the arrival of their child. He was by her side every step of the way, sharing in her joy and easing her fears with his quiet strength. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, Xenia felt a sudden, sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly as she doubled over, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Xenia, Luke's voice was filled with alarm as he knelt beside her, his hands gentle but firm as he tried to steady her. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" Xenia nodded, her face pale as she tried to catch her breath. "It hurts," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Something's wrong, Luke." Luke's expression darkened with concern, and he quickly helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as he guided her back into the house. "We need to get you to Rhea," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "She'll know what to do." The walk to Rhea's home felt like an eternity, each step filled with a growing sense of dread. Xenia's mind raced with fear and uncertainty, the pain in her abdomen growing more intense with each passing moment. By the time they reached Rhea's door, she was barely able to stand, her legs trembling with the effort. Rhea took one look at Xenia's pale face and immediately sprang into action, guiding her to a nearby bed and instructing Luke to fetch a basin of water and clean cloths. The older woman's calm, steady demeanor was a comfort in the midst of Xenia's fear, but it did little to ease the growing sense of panic that had taken hold of her. "What's happening to me?" Xenia whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched Ria's hand. "Is something wrong with the baby?" Ria's expression was serious, but her voice was calm and reassuring as she checked Xenia's vital signs. "It's too early to say for sure," she said gently, "but I'm going to do everything I can to help you, Xenia. You need to stay calm for your sake and the baby's." Xenia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. The pain in her abdomen had lessened slightly, but it was still there, a constant reminder that something was not right. She could feel Luke's presence beside her, his hand warm and reassuring as he held hers, but the fear in his eyes mirrored her own. Ria worked quickly and efficiently, her hands gentle but firm as she examined Xenia. "It looks like you're experiencing preterm labor," she said finally, her voice tinged with concern. "The baby's trying to come early, but it's not ready yet. We need to stop the labor and give the baby more time to grow." Xenia's heart sank at Ria's words, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is the baby going to be okay?" Ria's expression softened, and she placed a comforting hand on Xenia's shoulder. "We're going to do everything we can to keep the baby safe," she said gently. "I have some herbs that might help slow the labor, but you'll need to rest and avoid any stress or physical exertion. It's going to be a delicate balance, but I believe we can get through this." Xenia nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She wanted so badly to believe Ria's words, to trust that everything would be okay, but the uncertainty of the situation weighed heavily on her. She could feel Luke's hand tighten around hers, his presence a steady reassurance in the midst of her fear. "We'll do whatever it takes," Luke said firmly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll take care of each other, Xenia. You're not alone in this." Tears filled Xenia's eyes as she looked up at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man who had become her everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Luke smiled, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll never have to find out," he said softly. "We're in this together, Xenia, every step of the way." With Ria's help, Xenia was able to stabilize, the contractions gradually easing as the herbs took effect. But the fear lingered, a constant shadow in the back of her mind as she lay in bed, her body weak and trembling from the ordeal. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there were no guarantees in this world, but with Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. The days that followed were a delicate balance of rest and care, Xenia confined to bed while Luke and the other colonists took on the tasks she could no longer manage. It was a time of uncertainty, of fear and hope intertwined, as they waited to see if the baby would make it to term. Xenia's heart ached with a mixture of longing and fear, her mind filled with thoughts of the future, of the life she had so desperately wanted to build with Luke. But through it all, Luke was a constant presence, his love and support a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. He was there to hold her when the fear became too much, to soothe her worries with gentle words and tender touches. He was her rock, her strength, and with him by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the weeks passed, Xenia's condition stabilized, the threat of preterm labor gradually easing. It was a slow, nerve-wracking process, but with Ria's guidance and Luke's unwavering support, Xenia found the strength to carry on, to keep fighting for the future she so desperately wanted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting and uncertainty, the day came when Xenia went into labor for real. The pain was intense, the contractions coming fast and hard, but this time there was no fear, only a fierce determination to bring her child into the world safely. Luke was by her side every step of the way, his hand warm and reassuring as he whispered words of encouragement in her ear. The hours dragged on, the pain building to a crescendo as Xenia's body worked to bring new life into the world. It was a battle, one that pushed her to the very limits of her strength, but she refused to give up, refused to let fear take hold. She could feel the life inside her, the tiny, fragile being that she had fought so hard to protect, and she knew that she would do whatever it took to bring her child into the world. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take any more, there was a sudden sharp cry, a sound that filled the room with a sense of awe and wonder, a sound that made Xenia's heart swell with love and relief. Her baby had been born. Tears streamed down Xenia's face as Ria placed the tiny, squirming bundle in her arms, the baby's cries filling the room with a sound that was both miraculous and overwhelming. Xenia looked down at her child, her heart filled with a love so intense it took her breath away. "It's a girl," Rhea said softly, her voice filled with warmth and congratulations. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." Xenia's heart swelled with emotion as she gazed down at her daughter, the tiny, perfect being that she had fought so hard to bring into the world. She was so small, so fragile, but she was also strong, her cries a testament to the life that had been created against all odds. Luke leaned over, his eyes filled with tears as he looked down at their daughter, his hand gently stroking the baby's soft, downy hair. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "She's absolutely perfect." Xenia nodded, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude for the life they had created together. She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She's our miracle." Luke smiled, pressing a soft kiss to Xenia's forehead. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice filled with love. "Thank you for giving us this gift." Xenia looked up at him, her heart filled with a sense of peace and contentment that she had never known before. "We did this together," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "We made this life together." As they sat there, holding their daughter in their arms, Xenia knew that the trials they had faced, the challenges they had overcome, had all led to this moment. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a moment that would be forever etched in her memory as the culmination of all their hopes and dreams. The future was still uncertain, the world still filled with challenges and obstacles that they would have to face. But with Luke by her side, with their daughter in her arms, Xenia felt ready to face whatever came their way. They had built a life together, a life filled with love and hope, and that was all that mattered. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, casting a warm, golden glow over the room, Xenia looked down at her daughter, her heart filled with a love so profound it took her breath away. This was her family, her future, her life. And she wouldn't have it any other way.